kind of going to be an overall catch for all intellectual property. So it's going to, they're looking at universally extending copyright to the American standards, and as well as extending patents and invoking new, it goes as far as like border search and that sort of thing.
I don't know anything about the counterfeit issue. But if you say intellectual property rights, that rouses something in me, particularly about pharmaceuticals. And a fascinating part of the new World Trade Organization order, new 1995, is how the American pharmaceutical industry got its act together. It wanted powerful global intellectual property rights. In other words, monopoly property rights, so that it could exploit their drug brands. And they figured out that they would get a coalition. Talk about coalition government. They got a coalition with the European big pharmaceutical companies and the Japanese big pharmaceutical companies. They all came to an agreement about what strong rights they wanted, and persuaded the three governments, the European Union, Japan, and the US government, to push that these rights be incorporated in the World Trade Organization, as if property rights were trade. They succeeded perfectly. They got what they wanted, which is, so for the monopoly rights over exploiting a drug from being something like 7 years to something like 20 years. And there was, I don't think, any significant citizen involvement in discussing this. This was an industry, a global industry coalition, which created a new norm inside the WTO. So it's called TRIPS, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. And these are, in effect, as you suggest, I think, are American standards, or standards that the American industry wanted, and they got globalized. And this has a huge effect on us as citizens, because we pay, the public health system is in financial crisis, in part because the cost of branded drugs. The debate right now is about generics, but the much bigger issue is the power of big pharma to put drugs onto the markets at huge prices, and in a perverse way, this has been incorporated in the trade system. Anyway, you got me onto something different, but it's I would imagine that it would be a similar story with counterfeit, but I don't know what that story is.
What do you feel is the ideal form of democratic expression? I mean, do you see that happening best at a local level? Do you see it best as seeing a way to advance the national expression of democracy, or do you see a global sort of democracy through all the citizens working together to decide some global governance system? What is your ideal form?
Shall I start?
You start, okay.
You know, I imagine we have different answers to that. I would say that I don't have any ideal form. I think democracy happens at all of those levels. We devote a substantial portion of one of the chapters in the book to arguing for a revitalization of the Canadian democratic state. So we certainly see room for that, and in fact, I think a preponderance of the effort to revitalize democracy should probably be aimed at the national state, you know, including its subnational, you know, the provinces as well as the federal level. Local democracy too, of course, and, you know, global democracy. Well, it's hard to talk about a demos at the global level, but maybe we are moving in that direction. I'm not sure. I would I would say, you know, it's a mix of everything. One of the greatest challenges of the contemporary era is that the nation state has lost its monopoly over the political space, right? The political space is everywhere now. There's all different kinds of political spaces crisscrossing each other. It's sort of like a return to medievalism, or maybe a new form of medievalism. Perhaps. Maybe that's not the best analogy, but...
Well, I was going to say to you all, similarly to Stepan, all of the above, that citizens can act very locally, and churches are very powerful, potentially very powerful forums, because a lot of citizens go to their synagogue or their church or their temple every week, and they're nuclei of citizen activity there. But also individuals. I had a student who worked for a while for Now magazine, and then she went off on her own to South Africa, didn't know anybody. She got a job and then was soon working for Nelson Mandela in the presidency's office. Stephen Lewis picked her up, and she became his assistant on the AIDS issue for Africa when Stephen Lewis was at the United Nations. This is a citizen, and she just went and found herself involved in hugely important stuff. She's now at the World Health Organization in Geneva. But I think we're in a profound. It is as Stepan said, paradoxical and contradictory. We're in a profoundly demobilized state, I think, in Canada. If in the 1960s and the 1970s, there was perhaps a government that was more open to this, but it was there in part because there was a real feeling among the population that things should be improved. And I mentioned the constitutional debate in the early 80s. Women's groups changed the Charter of Rights by organizing. And they caused, in a federal election, they caused there to be a nationally televised debate of the leaders devoted only to women's issues. Now, at the moment, that's kind of unthinkable. There isn't that energy in us. But on the other hand, there's tremendous energy of some of us. Everyone here will know the name Maud Barlow. If you say that name downtown, they think, oh, this narrow nationalist. But this narrow nationalist is one of the champions of a global movement to create a global right to water. And I generally work in Mexico for a few weeks in Mexico City every winter for my work on North America. And one day there was Maud Barlow at a global conference on water, and she's a real leader of the effort to get water declared a right, so that companies can't privatize water. Some of you will know about Bolivia, where there was a huge fight in a town called Cochabamba because the water had been privatized. I think it was a French company that owned the water rights, and native citizens who were living in a mud-floored house were being prevented from collecting the rainwater that fell on their roofs, because water was now a private good. And this campaign against that has been led by a Canadian citizen. So in some sense, James Orbinski, Steve, we have some national icons who show that citizens can be effective at the global level, but then all of us can have some activity locally. So we're in a confused situation where both good and bad are happening simultaneously. Mike needs to go.
Ben,
okay.